Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's Wednesday morning, but there's a bunch of questions, so I guess everybody had enough time to get those in. So let's jump right in and see what we got. First up, over on Floatplane, another Hugh said they're looking forward to the VHS discussion. Not really a question, but I might be interested to know that the NoClip guys who are scanning in 20-year-old games journalism from abandoned tapes are hitting some VHS digitization issues. They think they're on the wait list for a retro TINK 4K. So is there anything I could do to get them bumped up? Well, first of all, this weekend, the TINK 4K is releasing, and there should be enough for everybody to go around. Mike made a lot more for this batch, so hopefully they won't sell out in a day. Hopefully it'll at least take a couple of days. So they should be able to get them. But do you know them at all? Can you put them in touch with me? Because while I'm sure they're experts in their field, it's very common for two people who are doing the same types of research, or two groups of people, to have different results with different stuff. So we might be able to pick each other's brains and help out. But yeah, the thing, I don't want to rehash an entire video that I'm about to release anyway. Well, the short version is the things about the TINKs, the 5X and the 4K that make them good for magnetic tape media is that the audio and video stay in sync. The digitization of the audio is very, very good. It's not, perfect, flawless MD Fourier stuff, but it's really close to the point where you could probably use it for analysis anyway, and certainly for archiving and stuff like that. So even if somebody is using the Doomsday kit, they still need a way to get audio, but they also need to sync up audio and video, and they need a way to verify their capture. So picking up a 5X or a 4K, and because remember, you play the tape while you're running the capture from Doomsday. So while your RF capture out is going to the raw RF capture is going to the Doomsday box, you could send an S-video or composite into one of the TINKs into an HDMI capture card. So you could do both at the exact same time. And I think a lot of people who do serious archival, even if they're not gamers, might pick one up just for that reason. You could also pick up garbage Amazon boxes and do the same thing. But as you'll see in the video, it's not a great idea. So yeah, I don't know. But if you know who they are, see if you could put them in touch with me. I'd love to help. Now, moving over to Patreon, Tony Escobar said, I might recall they asked a question about their Dreamcast and Saturn modes a while back. Basically, their M2 SSD, formatted as exFAT, would not mount on either their PC or Mac to add games. They ended up formatting new 1TB SSDs to FAT32, and while they could now add games, they've noticed that many of the games on either the Saturn or Dreamcast are either incredibly slow to load, or partially load before freezing, or occasionally do load just fine. They've noticed that some games consistently load correctly while others won't boot at all. If they reboot the Saturn or Dreamcast multiple times, they could sometimes get the ROM to finally run correctly. Have I ever run into this? They're not sure if it's the M2, the mode, or the ROMs. Could it be the M2 adapter connected to the mode? Could it be too many ROMs on the M2? Could it be the quality of the ROMs themselves? So I have a gut feeling about this one. Is whatever whatever storage, whether it's the M2, the standard SSD, whatever you got, is that full? Is that a 1TB SSD with 900 gigabytes worth of stuff on it, or 950 or whatever? If that's the case, you're going to run into severe slowdowns on those. And it was actually Epos Fox who taught me that, because I was talking about using one SSD that was very cheap and very fast. And he said the speed dropped off ridiculously low once you passed a certain capacity of storage. And I didn't realize that, because what I was using it for would never fill up the drive, or if it did, it would be during a capture, so it would fill it up as the capture progressed slowly, so it wouldn't be too big of a deal. So that could be it. Somebody else chimed in and said it could be power related, because SSDs require more power than SD cards. So that is absolutely something you could test. If you have a spare micro SD card, you could copy the ROMs that you know always give you trouble, copy it to a micro SD and see. So let's just say you have a 1TB SSD and you only have 200 gigabytes worth of stuff on it, right? So it's mostly empty. If you're still running into that, then yeah, put the ROMs on a micro SD and see what happens. Maybe it's that. But SSDs and M2s, while they do draw more power than micro SD cards, they still draw far less power than a mechanical spinning drive. So while power absolutely might be an issue, and Tony mentioned that the Saturn and Dreamcast both have been recapped by Stone Age Gamer and they have new power supplies. So that's unlikely that power would be an issue unless one of the power supplies turn out to be bad, but or the brand power supply or whatever else. But so I would just check the drives and check different media to see what happens. If the problem follows the drive, there you go. If it still happens, maybe just message me privately and I could see if I have a version of the same game I could send you just to see if you could test that out to see if it's the ROM that you downloaded. But so unfortunately, this is the problem with troubleshooting 20, 30, 40-year-old stuff is it could actually be a long list of things. But I think I gave you first steps to get started, so let me know how it goes, and hopefully this will just be an easy one. Couple of questions from Dustin Mattison. First, they're working on a plan for using their old motherboard as a NAS for general purpose, movies, retro games, music, etc. Currently, it has a Ryzen 5 3600 in it, plus it has a GTX 1650 and 16 gigabytes of RAM. They're wondering if this would be sufficient for what they're wanting to do, minus adding the storage drives for all of that stuff. That should be totally fine. I've run NAS stuff much slower. Just remember, the more things that you have it do at the same time, the more power that you need. So my lower powered NAS works absolutely perfect unless I'm downloading and unpacking a movie as I'm streaming a movie as it's doing something else, and then it kind of chokes a little bit. So, and if that's the case, I mean, do you really need to do all that stuff at the same time? Do you really need to spend a lot of money on a NAS? I'm only asking because I try to save people money wherever I can, because, unless you're mega rich and you could afford a whole bunch of really expensive computer gear just in case, then it's probably better to kind of tune your focus onto getting what you can on a budget. Next, is there a specific type of OS distro that would be better suited for this application? I have really, really liked UnRAID. All of my Linux friends scoff because you have to pay for it and there's a GUI. You can't just do everything through the command line. I think you can, but whatever. But in all honesty, it really is just way more intuitive than any of the other solutions I've tried. There's a RetroNAS installer right for it. Plus, you could do a whole bunch of other things. So I'll leave a link to that. Next, food question. Can I recommend any foods that folks don't always associate with my region of the country? They're willing to try just about anything. So, it's harder to say that nowadays. When I was growing up, there was lots of stuff that was like, every time you go to a new place, it was new and special. And nowadays it feels like you can get everything everywhere. So I don't know. I mean, there's always like the Northeast lobster rolls, seafood, stuff like that. Thin crust pizza, if you're going more north than New York. Connecticut's got really good thin crust pizza, if that's the stuff that you're into. I'm positive they have it in New York too, but I'm just saying, the stuff that you get around here that could be a little bit different. So yeah, I don't know. And last, their mind went kind of weird and they started writing a parody of the Brady Bunch theme song about the retro scene. If someone made a little AI music video, what Brady Square would I think I want my mugshot? And I've never seen the show. I obviously know what it is because anybody my age has heard the theme song and heard people talk about it. And then there was that new movie in the 90s or something, but I've never actually seen the show. So I don't know. Did the squares signify something, or is it just like, I don't know. Sorry, I got nothing for you on that one. Brent Optional is following up on a question from all the way back in last August about a problem they were having using the SNK Neo Geo wireless controller and a Dreamcast SD Wingman Brook adapter. They couldn't get it working over 2.4 gigahertz, even with the included dongle, direct Bluetooth or wired, and they had found a workaround by buying a $20 Bluetooth 8-bit DOE adapter. They emailed Brooke, who said they would purchase one of those Neo Geo controllers and work on compatibility, and it looks like they posted a firmware update recently that added support for that one. So it doesn't work via Bluetooth at the moment, but it does work the other ways. So that's awesome. It's really great to hear that Brooke is doing that. They sent me an adapter to lag test, but I don't have any of my kits here. Those have all been lent out, so I have to delay when I actually do that. But I will be doing a live stream demoing that, seeing how much latency it adds. That'll probably be a very long and boring one, unless you're one of the super nerds that really loves the stuff as much as I do. So yeah, I do appreciate you following up. Rent also wanted to say, for anyone that cares, the reason to use the Neo Geo CD controller on a Dreamcast is you could play almost the entire Neo Geo CD library on the Dreamcast via patched ISOs with an ODE or burned media. So why you'd choose to do that over Mister or a Pocket Dock is just a handful of exclusive Neo Geo CD games. And if you already have a Dreamcast and you don't have those other things, why not? So awesome. Glad it's working, and thanks for the update. Next up, Steven Standers is looking to use the ADC calibration for their N64 on their RetroTink 5X. So they want to know if they need to use an EverDrive to get some kind of test patterns on there, or is there a cheaper option as they have no use for the EverDrive outside of that? That is an excellent question. Yeah, you really do need test patterns to get it perfect. You could try to eyeball it a little bit, but test patterns are definitely the better way to go. I'll leave a link to Wobbling Pixels video that shows you how to do that. But this is one of those cases where if that's the only reason you need an EverDrive, I would almost talk to people and see if anybody's in your area that would be willing to let you borrow one real quick. Or maybe there's a game with like a really bright screen or something that you could use that to calibrate. That's a really good question, but I would see if there's anything out there that might be able to work for you. Definitely reference Wobbling Pixels video, and maybe you could just eyeball it, because the good thing about that is when you're talking about analog to digital conversion, since you're going to digital, it doesn't matter if you crank the brightness up all the way, you're not adding more voltage or anything like that. So the worst thing that you could do is get it wrong and reset the ADC back to the way it was. So this is one of those rare moments that absolutely feel free to mess around with the TINK 5X's settings and see what you got. But I'll leave a link to Wobbling's video and see if that could help you out a little bit. One more from Tony. Is there a way to assign a static IP address to a MiSTer? They're trying to use Wizzo's Tap2 app on their phone, and every time they reboot their MiSTer, they have to reprogram their NFC cards. Wizzo said it can't be done via MiSTer, but they thought they'd ask anybody here. So I thought there was a way to do it, but I thought the better way to do that would be to rename the MiSTer, and you could use Wizzo's free remote app to do exactly that. You load up remote, you load up your web interface, and you can go right in and change the name. So like I use the Retro Castle one as my main one, so I named it Castle. So it's castle.local would be the IP address. But I'm interested in how you're having trouble with the NFC cards, because that would be over your RetroNAS to your I believe to your RetroNAS, which you're going to have assigned a static IP, or even if you don't, it's not going to change very often. So even if the IP address on your MiSTer changes, it's still just hitting the RetroNAS. So that shouldn't have any issue whatsoever. And I test this all the time because my Tap2 is set up exactly like that. All of my MiSTers are just named, but they have DHCP, and it's set to the RetroNAS, which is fixed IP, and then I just tap the cards and there's no problem. So I would double and triple check that just to see. And I would also just see if you wanted to rename yours as well, just to see if that's an easier way to access it. Just remember too that all MiSTers take a while to connect to the your local network. So if your MiSTer's powered on and ready to go in 20 seconds, it might be an extra full minute before it hits your network, which is annoying as hell, but whatever. So yeah, give that a try and see if that helps. But and also just let me know what if there's anything going wrong with Tap2 or anything like that, because it doesn't seem like you should be having that issue, but I could just be missing something. Great question from Rent Optional. Why did TVs need to be tuned to channel 3 or 4, at least in North America, when hooking up old consoles or VCRs to RF? So you got to remember how RF works. It is a radio frequency that is broadcasting a signal to your TV. Now, it happens to be broadcasting it down a cable, but it's essentially the same thing as a wireless radio broadcast. So what those RF modulators do is take that incoming signal, composite video and audio, mix it together and broadcast it kind of like an antenna to your TV. And your TV just knows I'm going to tune into channel 3. But the issue is, what if you lived next to, or lived, they don't, analog TV is gone, but what if in the 80s or 90s you lived next to a tower for channel 3, let's just say? If you set your console to channel 3, you'd probably get a lot of interference because both things would be broadcast on that exact same frequency, which is why almost everything had a switch between 2 or 3 or 3 to 4, and you could just pick the least worst of. So that's basically it. But that's also why you could do things like take RF and attach it to an antenna and put another antenna on your TV, and it never looks great, but you could absolutely do something like that. That might also be why you may have remembered people doing weird things with aluminum foil, trying to dial in different stations and stuff like that. But yeah, that's basically it, because RF is a broadcast standard. And I'm kind of oversimplifying a bit. So if anybody wants to be pedantic and correct me in the comments, I actually enjoy learning stuff like this. But I think the basic overview here is spot on. So hopefully I got the question right. Next, a question from Al Anonymous. What's up, Al? How's it going? They need a new external HDMI capture card that plays well with weird arcade signals that are being upscaled 3x via the OSSC. That can't link style dongle is what they use now, and while it does work, the sound goes out of sync. They already have a few of the original first-gen cam links. Do I have any suggestions? So you could try using those blue boxes, those generic ones that you would see on Amazon for fairly cheap. They're not great, but they work and they're not expensive. They basically have the same technology that those SCART to HDMI boxes have in them. So it's not going to be your best bet, but it would certainly work. You could try to get one of those SCART to HDMI boxes, feed your OSSC into that or into a splitter and then into that if you need to, and have that kind of change and normalize the signal a little bit. So those would definitely work, but I don't know. I think I would actually default to Epos Vox on this one because he really keeps current on all of the capture cards that are being released these days. So if you wanted something more than just a cheap solution, I would check out his recent reviews and see if there's any one that kind of fits your needs. Generally stay away from Elgato because most of the time I've had just tons of issues with those. I know there's supposedly a newer one that works better, but I've never had it work right. Ever. Or if I do get it to work right, it's not consistent. It'll be 2 out of 3 times it'll work or won't work or something like that. But yeah, I would go with like the cheap generic blue boxes on Amazon and see it, if you want something cheap. And if you want something quality, definitely check out Epos Vox's channel. And if you have Thunderbolt and some money to spend, that Live Gamer Bolt is really, really good in most cases. It just can't do 4K 60 lossless, which I don't think you're going to need for the stuff that you do for your streams and stuff like that. I mean, if you wanted to do archival stuff, cool, but I think 99.9999% of people who even are content creators don't need 4K 60 true lossless. So it wasn't a dig against your streams or anything. It just, you need to be insane to need those clips in perfect form to do this analysis. So yeah, I hopefully could point you in the right direction there, but it really just depends on if you're going for quality or if you just want a cheap solution that just works. Next up is a pretty interesting question from Mike Squiet. They had been originally using the OSSC for a while and really liked it, and then picked up a RetroTink 5X when it was released, and actually preferred the picture from the OSSC on their 2014 Samsung LED TV. They compared 4 or 5 different systems and even had somebody else come in and they preferred the OSSC as well. So they sold the TINK 5X and kind of stuck with what they got. So is this all just a matter of taste or opinion? Could their TV be more compatible with the OSSC, or could it possibly be something else? So I have to make some assumptions here, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume that you just plugged your consoles into the OSSC and left it in generic scaling mode, and then you plugged your consoles into the TINK 5X and left it at its generic settings as well, which is both totally fine, by the way, but I'm only assuming that because if you're talking about comparing the OSSC in 5X mode with custom profiles and phase dialed in versus the TINK in just generic mode with nothing custom, yeah, it probably will look a little bit sharper. So I'm assuming this is going to be an apples to apples comparison, but that's a really good question. And I'm actually not sure what the issue could be. I'm also assuming it's the same cables on both of them and the same content and all that other stuff. It could be that it's the 2014 Samsung. Those weren't bad back then. They've come absolutely come a long way. But that is interesting. It could just be the way the OSSC handled the generic scaling. It could be the first edition firmware of the TINK 5X, and if you had tried it again, maybe the version almost late threes now at this point, maybe it would just look better because of everything that got dialed in and all the tweaks that were added. So it could have been just so many different things. But getting to Mike's actual question, with the new batch of TINK 4Ks going on sale Saturday, they're considering buying one. They still have the same 2014 flat screen, not 4K, not top of the line or anything, but they're wondering with all the settings and profiles, would the TINK look better than their OSSC? So this is just my opinion. Do whatever it is that you would like. But if I were you, if like our situations were swapped right now, first and foremost, you have an awesome setup. So there's never anything wrong with leaving well enough alone. It's not like you had a pound cable or something, which I would be like, yes, change it right away. But also, I personally would wait and get a really nice TV, keep using the OSSC, and then eventually get a RetroTink 4K. I think that you might notice a difference on a 1080p 60 TV, but you might not. However, if you swapped that TV out for a new or new-ish OLED that ran at 4K and everything, I think you would absolutely notice an immediate difference between the OSSC and the RetroTink 4K. The sharp scaling to its native resolution, all of the extra features. So just my opinion on this one, but if I were you, I would leave well enough alone and let your next purchase be a TV whenever it is that you need that, and then pick up the TINK 4K. And while the OSSC absolutely still holds its own, especially if you take the time to dial in settings and stuff like that, you will notice a difference when you're running native 4K with all those extra features and options. So yeah, hopefully I was able to give you some insight, but that's an interesting one. But I would save your money and get a really nice TV first, then swing back and get the TINK 4K. Next up, Adam Ant said they have 2 PlayStation 1s for sale with the PSIO mod. They haven't downloaded the new firmware yet, but they hear it sounds like a chore. They bought theirs from Stone Age Gamer. So their question is, should they go ahead and make the account with Sibdyne, upgrade the firmware, and reduce the price by $10, or should they give the buyer the Stone Age Gamer information and help them upgrade afterwards? In my opinion, what's the less cumbersome thing for the buyer? That's a good question. I would personally, if this were me, because I've had people reach out to try to get their PSIO transferred over and said, hey, look, I don't want to deal with this. Could I just pay the $10? And Matt said, no, we have to contact the original buyer first. So I would sell them, and I would then work with the buyer to get it transferred. Apparently, people going through Stone Age Gamer are having a much easier time than people who are just bought one on eBay, even if it's totally legit and all of that stuff. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about trying to upgrade it now, not because of the $10, but because of the BS that you have to deal with. So this is, I tried so hard in the podcast this week to be polite and respectful, and it took all of my willpower, because this is just, in my opinion, a 2 middle finger up in the air, holy crap, I can't believe you treat your customers this way moment. A lot of people have disagreed, and politely so, which was always cool. I'm only human, right? I certainly take criticism a lot better when it's spoken to me, not screamed at me, but I respect the other opposing opinions. I understand where they're coming from, but I just think this is the most giant load of BS I've ever heard. However, if you do this by selling it and then transferring it over after, at least it will already be then in the buyer's email address and account, so you don't need to do it twice anyway. Because what if you go through all of this trouble, you have it transferred over to you, you sell them, and then another firmware update is released another 4 years from now or whatever the hell it is, and then you have to just go through this process again. So I would just rip the Band-Aid off now, sell it to the customer, and then walk them through transferring it and help them out and all of that stuff. And hopefully an alternative software will be released for this, because this is just not what should be happening when people are giving somebody their money to buy a product. They shouldn't have to continue to hunt people down just to continue using it. Next up, Tim the Gamer 23 said, when doing maintenance on older consoles, is it also recommended to proactively replace any voltage regulators? For example, the 7805 on a Sega Genesis. And should we be using the higher output 2 amp types? Console 5 sells both the 7805 and the 78S05, which is the 2 amp version. So that's a really good question, and that's one that's been debated back and forth. And I'm pretty sure, and this is an educated guess, I'm pretty sure it's not bad in any way, unless you get some crappy knockoff or something like that. But I don't think any harm could come of it. There's some argument of, do you need to? There's switching different types of voltage regulators that could introduce noise into analog video signals. But for me personally, when I refurbish a console like that, I do swap out the 7805 with another one. And, I clean it really great. I put good thermal paste on it to make sure. And I've used both drop-in 7805s as well as the higher amp versions, and I've never tested a difference. Now, when I say that, I don't mean I've played a couple hours of Sonic the Hedgehog on my Genesis and didn't feel a difference. I mean video analysis, MD4A audio analysis, and all of the deep dive testing you all see me do. So while it's a guess with a lot of hours of pretty deep dive testing behind it. So if it were me, I would buy a new one, but I don't know if I would necessarily get a higher amperage one. I personally would replace it just because it's an aging component that's going to die at some point. So if they're still available, why not? But if anybody has any opinions on that, I would love to learn more. I would love to know if I'm missing something on this one. But I think that's generally pretty decent advice. Next up, Jason Guffey has an LG C3 OLED that they'd like to be able to use with certain HDMI 2.1 features like auto low latency mode and variable refresh rate. However, their AVR doesn't support those, so they're considering having their HDMI switch plug right in their TV and then using ARC or eARC to run the audio back from the AVR to that. They've never used either before, so for starters, what bandwidth of HDMI cable do they need? Is 18 gigabytes 4K 60 enough? Definitely. Any other considerations they should make? The distance of the cable run, cable shielding, or connector type? Nope. So what you're going to be using that ARC port for is almost always just audio. Or if you do have stuff run through your AVR, which I'm assuming would be lower bandwidth content like 1080p 60 or below that, or if you just want to use, like for me in my setup back here, I switched my setup around for many different reasons, by the way, but I had it set so everything's going into the TV and the eARC port was going to my amp. And I only set my TV input to that eARC port when I needed to see the on-screen display of the amp for setup reasons. But that would be the only reason I would ever switch to it. So other than an OSD or the audio, so the cable length and the cable type really matters a lot less. The only problem I have, which you will not because you have a C3 OLED, is my 2016 OLED does not support Dolby Atmos audio at all. So I can't pass it through the eARC port to my amp. I have to have whatever I'm using going into the amp and then from the amp to the TV, which has been creating some other issues. So that's definitely, for your setup, you should have no problems whatsoever. The only other thing you're going to want to definitely mess with, which is so boring and time consuming, but you need to check your settings on the amp and on the TV. And this is the problem I ran into on that Marantz receiver, which it turned out, I think the receiver is totally fine. The problem was that the two TVs that I've been testing it with recently were like 2014 and 2012. So it was a different version of ARC. So it wasn't compatible with the Marantz's CEC features. So ARC worked perfect, but the amp would randomly change inputs or shut off because they weren't speaking the same language. So the TV must have been doing like a phone home thing, like, hey, make sure we're still connected, just so, otherwise stop playing. And then the amp would interpret that as switch inputs or do something else. So that was a giant pain, and Marantz's customer service was really bad. But turns out that once I used a brand new TV with it, it was fine. Which the only odd part is it was working fine. I'm pretty sure a TV must have done an auto software update that kind of messed with that or something, but so that's the only thing you're going to want to double check is, do you need to turn off CEC control on your amp? Turn it on both, turn on one and off on the other. And it's very convoluted. You're going to have to just keep messing with it. So, just keep trying. You'll eventually get it. And because you have a newer TV, you really shouldn't have to worry about it. You might have a problem if the AVR is super old, but if it supports ARC, you should be able to find some setting tweak that would be able to help, or at the very least, get a CEC remover, which is just a cheap little HDMI dongle thing. So if you have any issues like mine, my issue was the old TV, but if yours is the old AVR, a CEC remover should be able to help because you could still pass ARC through that one thing. But give those a try and see, but this should be an easy one. I just wanted to over-explain because there's so much that can go wrong with ARC. Well, that's it for this time. If you have any question at all, please ask wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post, because the way these services work, I can't figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, like you saw today, I like just scrolling through in real time and having a conversation as if we were just hanging out somewhere chatting. So thank you so much to everybody who supports in absolutely any way. Thank you to people who participate, and I will see you all next week.